Where are we? So I'm Sybil Kolon again. You may wonder where the Kolongowski went. My dad and his two brothers all shortened their name immediately upon coming age from Kolongowski to Kolon. So anyway, we'll start with an aerial photo here. When Grant Sutton died in 1937, the effects of the Great Depression were still being felt. On top of that, Michigan went through its worst recorded drought from 1930 to 1937, the Dust Bowl years. In this aerial photo from 1937, you can barely see the outline of Iron Creek around the farmyard. We know little about the property between 1937 and 1948. I described that time as the first period of neglect. By 1948, when my grandparents bought the farm, the weather had returned to normal, and the economy of Detroit and Michigan had come roaring back after World War II. Why my grandparents decided to move to the Irish Hills to start a farm is a mystery we may never solve. Each of them had immigrated from Poland when they were 16, between the years of 1906 and 1909. We don't know if either of them had ever lived on a farm or if they wanted to start a farm all along. They got married in 1913 and had the first 6 of their 7 kids by 1922. My grandfather, Louis Kolongowski, had started Colonial Electric Company in 1913, according to my father's business card, an electrical contracting family since 1913. 35 years later, he decided it was time for a change, and they bought the 130-acre Sutton farm on both sides of Noggles Road. He left his business to his son Irv. He and my grandmother, along with my aunt, moved to the farm in about 1949. Louis, as he was called, was 59, his wife, Rose, was 57, and Aunt Rosemary was 13. My aunt described the place as abandoned and overgrown when they bought it. Now we get some videos that we've retrieved. This is about 1950. Grandpa was getting water from Iron Creek for the chickens. And then we get some view of the property. It was really open then. We hope to get some of that back. Notice the bridge there. I will mostly refer to my grandfather as I tell this part of the story, but we know full well that my grandmother was working just as hard as he was, even if she may not have had much of a decision in the decision making. That was along the road, and we get a good picture of the house, about 1950. I believe the windows were later trimmed in yellow. Here's the family in the 1950s. I will now describe the massive amount of work that was done in the first few years. In addition to gutting the inside of the farmhouse, installing electricity and plumbing for the first time, remodeling, adding on a front and back porch and a bathroom, residing, plus getting a telephone line installed from US 12, they began growing corn and raising hundreds of chickens, ducks, and geese, which we'll see in this next video. Kids and grandkids began their regular weekend visits from Detroit, and Grandpa, who was taking that water we saw earlier to the chickens, I think, and giving them some feed. And we'll see a couple of the sheds here. And there's a break and then there's the jalopy going across the bridge. Some of my cousins in the back, and then I think we're going to see a dog following. So there was one dog named Sparky. I don't remember any cats. One of my older cousins reminded me that there were some pigs for a short time in the fen, which Aline from Legacy will talk about the fen shortly. And there's another video after this one. And that's my father cranking the handle, my Uncle Stan, my older cousin Paul, and my brother Paul in the striped shirt. We distinguish them as PG and PM, Paul Grishala and Paul Marcus Kolon. And show just a little bit more of that. You can see the corn carrying up there, and the
everyone just looks like they're having such a great time.
Yeah. All right, so now we'll go on to some of the sheds. There were at least 3 sheds in the yard. This is the same shed from different angles shown in September 1948, 3 months after they bought the place. There's another shed in the background on the left there with a shallow pitched roof. And then we have this shed, which was fairly close to the house. On the right, you can see the shed in the background. This is a clip, that's a clip I took from the video. The house appears to be the same as the shed shown on the left. And then this is one of the sheds that's been resided or rebuilt. We can date this picture to about April 14, 1949 by guessing the age of the youngest kid. The siding was the same as was used on the remodeled farmhouse, but notice how short the shed is. The shed was tripled in length before too long. And then we jump to a much, somewhat more recent picture, which shows most of the chicken coop. This picture shows the shed in 1979 as well as a display of our produce. We called it the chicken coop for decades after the chickens were gone. I had never noticed that the entire shed was built with very old wood, from sideboards to roof boards, but the studs were 1950s era. During the deconstruction of the shed, and after getting pictures from my cousin of all the sheds in the yard, it became clear that the chicken coop was built from the wood salvaged from the other sheds, late 1800s era. The kerf marks on the wood authenticated the board's age. Now we move on to some aerial photos. This one is from 1940. The land had not changed too much from 1937. Iron Creek is highlighted there. We will focus on the east side of Noggles Road, the preserve area. The property on the west side of the road was sold after my grandparents had died. It is again quite clear that most of the 80 acres was being or had been used for farming. Because Washtenaw County and Manchester Township were prime sources of sheep, and based on how clear it was, I always presumed the Suttons had raised lots of sheep, but Laura says that's not the case. The fields on the right are much lighter, which may indicate they were being cultivated. The rest of the open areas look fallow. Notice there are at least 2 small orchards. There's some, there was actually 1 apple tree in that area to the south that survived until about an ice storm about 5 years took it out. And the next one is a close-up of the area of the farmyard. I have only an undated paper copy, but I'm quite sure this is 1949. Notice all the activity in the farmyard and signs of small sheds. Notice the windy creek on the north, but to the south it is straight. And you can also see a small bridge to the south there. And then we get to see another video, and you'll see some of the grandkids, and there's a cement mixer. You'll get another look at the cement mixer in a second. And then the kids make their way to the creek just south of the farmhouse, and you can see the dredge spoils that were piled up there. My grandfather dredged and straightened the creek. So the next is an aerial photo from 1950, which is quite striking. Notice how straight the creek is. It's easy to see the main bridge that goes east over Iron Creek. And there's a well-worn path between the gravel pit on the right there, and then going all the way to the yard, more evidence of Louis' penchant for moving earth. The lightest colored areas you see, again, the gravel pit and the yard, are light because it's sand or gravel. And then I have to jump forward to 1979. My father had decided we needed to install irrigation in our big garden north of the house, which is the area, the wide open area there that's light colored. While digging the trench, we hit a layer of gravel between 2 layers of muck soil. That didn't make sense. That's when my dad told us about how Grandpa had scraped off the topsoil and brought in gravel from the gravel pit, then replaced the topsoil. That was the best garden ever, rich soil and good drainage, and for us, irrigation when needed. To haul that much gravel, you need a good bridge. We call this the Kolongowski Memorial Bridge. It's 75 years old. Louis did not fool around. You can see the structural steel and the concrete hasn't moved an inch. In 1990, we replaced the original 2x10 oak boards with treated so-called 4x4s. They have lasted, but I'm sure they will be upgraded by legacy. The original boards lasted 61 years. This is from 1955, and we can observe still more changes. The gravel pit has grown in somewhat, and then it's hard to see, but there's a new ditch that runs diagonally from the corner, the right-hand corner, all the way up, and then down to the trail, where it crosses under the trail and goes through a concrete culvert that's over a foot in diameter, and then the ditch, you can see, runs right down the side of the trail, the south side of the trail to the creek. There were no such things as permits in those days, and there is still a large shallow wetland that extends off the property to the northeast. Life continued on. This is Louis in 1966 with his youngest grandchild. He used to listen to WJR's farm report on that radio every morning at 5 a.m., very loud. My grandfather died in 1967. My grandmother moved back to Detroit to live with one of her daughters. A cousin or two tried their hand at farming. I learned recently that some of my youngest cousins spent some summers out here, but mostly the house and the land sat vacant, the second period of neglect for the farmhouse. On April 1st, 1976, my husband and I moved in. Some of you know Mon from Pyramid Office Supply. We had moved out of Michigan 6 months before, but Mon's job fell through. My dad had negotiated for our family to lease the house and 84 acres with an option to buy. We never looked back. Very briefly, 3 years later, Mon and I accepted jobs that took us away from the farm. My mother, stepfather, and sister moved in. In 1982, Mon and I came back and built our house just north of what will soon be Iron Creek Preserve. We moved into the basement in 1983 and upstairs in 1986. As it turns out, I still had some of Grandpa's inclination for moving earth without a thought about how it may affect natural habitats. I won't go into that right now, but we did try to be thoughtful as we built. We did displace woodcocks and whippoorwills, and I haven't thought about that in a long time until I started writing this, but there are still woodcocks, and the whippoorwills, which kind of disappeared for a while, they are back. They will have an even better chance of thriving with legacy managing the land. My father, mother, and stepfather were an integral part of this place, as are my brothers, sister, and their kids and grandkids. They also grew up coming out here as kids and forming bonds with this place that will never be broken. As with the Sutton family, when one generation passes, someone else has to step in. My parents had all passed by 1997. We kept the farmhouse in the family. Eventually, it was rented to a friend. Then the well and septic failed. That began the third period of neglect. Somehow, all of that history has led to this property, this land, becoming a protected nature preserve. The closer it gets to legacy taking over, the more right it feels. This whole process has been very humbling. What do I know about history? How can I possibly imagine the lives of my grandparents, much less the Sutton family or the indigenous peoples who were here first? But I do believe there is value in thinking about what has already passed. This knowledge can inform our future. With that, I will turn it over to Marion Feinberg, who has been instrumental in this whole process. Now that we have provided some background, Marion will help us appreciate the value of deconstruction. Based on what I saw as this house was taken apart, I would say that both the Sutton and Kolongowski families did not do things halfway. If they were going to do it, they were going to do it right.